To discuss the current status and future prospects of medical marijuana in Nevada and nationally, we are joined again by Rob Kampia, Executive Director of the Medical Marijuana Project, headquartered in Washington, D.C. Welcome back to Las Vegas, sir, and to the agenda. Nice to see you.
Thanks for coming. Mr. Kampia, you were quite helpful in sending us some notes on how Nevada's dispensary law differs in many aspects from similar laws in other states. So I want to run through those, and let's start with the issue of reciprocity. Explain to us how we're different.
Reciprocity means that when these medical marijuana stores start up in Nevada, that they'll be able to sell to patients who are not from Nevada. That is a very rare thing for medical marijuana to include, but it's important.
I'm assuming that presumes that they have a medical marijuana card from another state, right? Okay.
So that's good for tourism.
It's good for the health of sick tourists.
Very well done, sir. All right, next one. This is very fascinating to me because this is kind of a free market issue. You told me about how vertical integration is a requirement in other states, but not in Nevada. Tell us what that means. So
vertical integration in the marijuana world means that the person who's growing the marijuana also has to sell the marijuana, which is actually a dumb idea, because if you're someone who's good at farming, you don't necessarily want to run a retail store. And if you want to run a retail store, you don't want to have to be a farmer. So luckily the Nevada law was written correctly, which means you don't actually have to be engaged in both activities.
There's a limited number of seats, if you will, licenses, whatever they're called, for people to set up the dispensaries throughout the state. I can't remember what the numbers are. It's less than 20, I believe. And so is there similarly then a limited number of licenses, of regulatory approvals for people who are cultivating in the state? Do we know that?
The state executive branch will determine the nuances of this. So they'll release the regulations by the spring of 2014. And there'll be all kinds of numbers and requirements and so forth in those regs.
See, this is a piece of it that I really haven't given much thought to with respect to the cultivation. I just assumed that we would import the finished product, just like we always do in Nevada, as opposed to, we have no manufacturing base, not much in ag either, frankly. I just figured we'd import this stuff. But, I mean, is there a possibility of cultivation here in Nevada?
Yeah, it's all done indoors, so it'll just be greenhouses, which, of course, could exist anywhere. It's important to note that all state medical marijuana laws do not allow interstate commerce, because they want to minimize federal interference.
Now, on the subject of state-to-state commerce on this issue, you also pointed out to me that our law enables out-of-state investment money to come into Nevada and get involved in the growing and selling of marijuana. So I was surprised to hear that. That doesn't seem like a big deal to me, that anyone could apply, but in other states that's not the case?
Yeah, in some states they don't allow outside investment money, and it's important to allow it, because if you disallow it, then out-of-state investors will just cheat the law, they'll cheat the system, they'll come up with some shell in the state and they'll invest anyway. So at least the Nevada law is transparent.
I just want to clarify something you said earlier about interstate commerce. So what you're saying is that actually Nevada dispensaries cannot import marijuana from other states?
Correct.
So it has to be cultivated here then?
Correct.
I didn't know that. I didn't realize that was part of it.
That's pretty interesting. I don't think we have that requirement, as you pointed out. I think in your remarks, for any other product that I can think of, that it's got to be made or grown in Nevada. That is pretty interesting. How did that come about? Did your organization have a hand in getting that in there?
Well, we helped draft it for sure, but the difference between marijuana and any other product, as you say, is that marijuana is the only product that's actually illegal under federal law.
Right, right. I'm sorry, this is fascinating. I'm going down this rat hole, but it seems to me like that is, in some respects, a potential violation of the Interstate Commerce Clause of the Constitution when you say that you are not going to allow a product to be imported into your state. Has that popped up in any of the legal discussions about this, or is it because it's an illegal product it just feels that it's not, that doesn't apply?
Well, I mean, there's been litigation on the Interstate Commerce Clause question with regard to marijuana, but the argument there was, I think, perhaps the reverse of what you're suggesting, which is that the idea was that marijuana prohibition in and of itself is a violation of the Interstate Commerce Clause, because if a patient is growing one plant in the middle of a state, not engaged in commerce, not engaged in currency, for the U.S. government, then that shouldn't even be a federal law.
Yeah.
But yet it is.
Now, in states that are ahead of this with respect to having dispensaries and presumably then cultivation in their own states, are there in particular like a couple of big players, like the Targets and Walmarts of marijuana growth, if you will, that we can expect to show up here?
There aren't any Walmarts yet. There's some people who are saying very vocally that they want to be the Walmart.
And I guess actually what I'm thinking would be more like the lines of Archer Daniels Midland of marijuana production, yeah.
Perhaps. I know people are trying to do that, but it's difficult to create a conglomerate when you're not able to move it across state lines. So I think there will be conglomerates eventually, and we're not opposed to that because we think that there should be a variety of businesses involved.
All right, that's pretty interesting. We will be back to discuss Nevada and the nation's changing marijuana policy, including medical marijuana for kids. That has its advocates. The agenda returns right after this.
Welcome back to the agenda. We're here with Rob Kampia, Director of the Marijuana Policy Product. So you had mentioned earlier in the earlier segment that the executive branch of Nevada would be making some decisions, and that's the governor's office, just to be clear about that, making some decisions about how this is all going to work. In addition to that, the government actually is going to make the decision about the merits of the applicants, who gets approved and who doesn't. And the reason that's kind of important is that in states like Arizona, it was more like a lottery system. So the standards were lower and just anyone got picked because their name got picked out of a hat? Is that how it works?
Yeah, in Arizona they did it poorly, which is that they had really minimal requirements, and then they had a lottery system where they actually had these lottery balls bouncing around. That actually is not...
Did they televise that?
I think it was.
That's kind of weird.
But the way to really do it is actually to have a more sophisticated merit system. And things like, has the person been convicted of selling drugs to children? Is the business well capitalized, and so forth? And so Nevada's going about it the right way.
Are there also any kind of health and safety regulations that are in line with this in terms of making sure that the marijuana that's being sold, for instance, isn't laced with some kind of nasty pesticide or something like that?
Right. So the executive branch in Nevada will issue regulations on the question of whether the marijuana needs to be tested in a testing facility, and if so, is it going to be tested for fungus and herbicides and so forth. So that'll be in the regs.
All right. I do want to switch gears, as I suggested before the break, and that is an issue that's kind of popped up and I hadn't really given much thought about. But apparently a lot of the states that have medical marijuana laws and they allow use of medical marijuana also allow the use of medical marijuana for children. I don't think it's not actually smoked, and it's actually kind of refining the cannabis so that it lowers the THC level, but you still get these other cannabinoids, I believe they're called, that apparently are helpful in terms of treatment for epilepsy, autism, some other conditions. But naturally, there are some folks who think, wow, we weren't thinking about that when we went down this road. What's your take on this?
Well, we were thinking about it because we were the ones who drafted that.
Yeah.
From state to state. Our position is that children with cancer should have the same medical treatments as adults with cancer. So the difference between children and adults is that if an adult has cancer, they need to get a recommendation from a doctor. The child needs a recommendation from a doctor and the parent. Furthermore, children can't use in high school or junior high openly. They're not able to carry weed around with them in the school. The marijuana, if it's actually needed to be used during the school day, it would be administered in the same way that any other prescription medicine would be administered, which means you actually have to go to the nurse's office.
Yeah. And excuse me, isn't it like an inhaler or something that they use, or how does that happen?
I mean, it could be eating it, or it could be vaporized.
Aren't there some developmental issues there in terms of, a child's brain is growing and it's developing cognitive skills and so forth, and one thing for a mature adult who has fully developed in terms of those things to be using marijuana, but is it really safe for kids to use it even if it does have some medical benefit?
Well, marijuana is safer than a lot of the prescription medicines that are being given in the sense that you can overdose on OxyContin and Ritalin, but you can't overdose on marijuana, for example. Also, in terms of developmental issues, it's important to note that if a child needs to use marijuana to stay alive, that should trump anything else.
All right, well, we've been talking about this in the context of medical marijuana, which has very, very wide acceptance, of growing acceptance, but not as widely accepted, of course, as just recreational use of marijuana. And I understand that your organization, along with allies in Nevada, are going to push to make Nevada a legal place for recreational use as well. What can you tell us about that?
We're just having exploratory conversations about that right now. You know, we're talking to some political consultants in Nevada, some funders in Nevada, some politicians. We're just at the beginning stages, but I think that there's a consensus that it's probably appropriate to move forward with a law in Nevada that looks very similar to the law that we just passed in Colorado, which is legalization for adults 21 and older.
Based on your conversation so far, is it more likely that if everyone agrees, okay, let's move forward with this, is that going to happen through the legislative process, or is this going to be a ballot initiative most likely?
If we move forward, it would be a ballot initiative for November of 2016. It'd be statutory.
Have you learned, you mentioned Colorado earlier, and it was just in this last election, correct, that they legalized recreational use. Have we learned anything as a result of the Colorado experience that maybe you think now Nevada should probably do this a little differently than how Colorado did it?
There's two parts to the Colorado law. The one is that right after the law passed in November, adults were allowed to use marijuana and grow their own at home. So what we've learned from Colorado is that the moon did not fall from the sky on adult use and adult cultivation. That's good. Business side of things in Colorado, we're not going to know until the end of this year. There are no recreational marijuana stores yet. They haven't been set up.
Yeah.
And those are set up as non-profits in Colorado. They're for-profit. In Nevada, though, all of our grow facilities and dispensaries will be what?
For-profit.
They'll be for-profit as well.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining, as always, and being our go-to guy on this issue. We appreciate it. Please let us know if you guys decide to move forward with that initiative. We'll have you back to talk about that, and voters can get ready for people knocking on their doors looking for those signatures. All right. Coming up next.